the days when the earth was loud with ambition and silent with reverence, I walked among the proud. Their faces gleamed with health, their hands were heavy with gold, and their lips poured out confident words that brushed aside heaven like dust on polished shoes. I saw them laugh, feast, and stretch their influence across city and nation. And I envied them. Though my hands were clean and my heart had been kept pure, I tasted bitterness. My prayers felt unanswered. Every morning I rose into trial, and every night I sank beneath invisible weights. The more I sought righteousness, the more I suffered. Meanwhile, those who mocked the heavens prospered. They were unbothered, untroubled, free from burdens, adorned in pride like necklaces, and clothed in violence as if it were fine linen. They questioned the knowledge of God, asking aloud, "Does the Most High even see?" Their words spread like wildfire. Their followers drank up their poison like sweet water, and I stood on the edge of surrender. Surely I had labored in vain. But one day, burdened in mind and aching in soul, I stepped into the sanctuary, not of stone and timber, but of silence and presence. And there, in the hush of divine reality, I saw their end. They stood on slippery ground. Like dreams at dawn, they would vanish. Like shadows at noon, they would dissolve. The ruin would be sudden, unimagined, irrevocable. For though their names were carved in marble, their foundations were air. My soul trembled, and in that trembling, I realized I had been a brute beast before him. Bitter, glacious, senseless. Yet he was still with me. He had taken me by the hand, not when I was faithful, but when I was furious. He had counseled me in confusion, and would lead me in time into glory. I whispered it aloud to no one and everyone. Whom have I in heaven but you? And on earth, nothing. My flesh may fail, my heart may crumble, but God is the strength of my heart, my portion, forever. I journeyed out into the world again. The sun burned high, and the world was no quieter than before. But I was no longer envious. I had been marked. The voice of the Master echoed in me. He had said long ago by the shore, a sower went out to sow. I now understood. The seed of truth is not received by all. Some hearts are trampled paths, where the evil one snatches away every word. Some are rocky ground, excited for a moment, but rootless. Others grow among thorns. The cares of life, the seduction of riches, choking the word into silence. But then, there is good soil, soil that listens, soil that breaks, soil that waits. And in that soil, the seed becomes fruit, 100-fold, 60-30. I had thought myself a failed tree, but in truth, I was soil, and he had not stopped sowing. One night, I dreamed. In the dream, a field lay golden beneath a pink skiwami. A farmer scattered good seed into the soil. And while he slept, an enemy crept in and sowed weeds. When the weeds sprouted, so did the thorns. The servants ran to the master. "Shall we pull up the weeds?" "No," he said. "You may harm the wheat with your haste. Let both grow. In the end, I will separate them." I awoke with tears in my eyes. How many weeds had I tried to rip out? In others, in myself, without understanding the timing of Gustud. My fingers were impatient. But the gardener, he knew when to cut and when to leave. I wandered through cities, deserts, and villages, carrying parables in my heart. I heard him again in my soul. The kingdom is like a mustard seed, small, unnoticed, but in time, it became a great tree. The kingdom is like yeast, silent, slow, but it leavened the entire loaf. The kingdom is like treasure hidden in a field, so precious, a man sold all he had to obtain it. I wept in alleys, I prayed in abandoned churches, I sang softly on mountains. People looked at me strangely. They asked, "Isn't he the quiet man from the East District? What's happened to him?" I smiled. A prophet is never honored in his hometown. One evening, I found myself alone in a vineyard, vines twisted around ancient wooden beams, fruit heavy with ripeness. The wind was soft, the sky warm with twilight. Then I heard his voice, not in sound but in spirit. "I am the true vine. I am the vine. You are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit." I knelt there as the revelation bloomed. Without him, I was nothing. Not a scholar, not a pilgrim, not even dust. Apart from the vine, the branch withers, dries, and is burned. But in him, the dry blooms, the broken binds, the weary bears fruit. He does not abandon. He prunes, not to harm, but to deepen. The world hated him. I now understood why it hated me. It is not comfortable to love purely. It is not welcome to speak truth when lies pay better. But he had said it clearly. If the world hates you, remember it hated me first. And so when I was slandered, I remained silent. When I was beaten, I did not curse. When I was left in darkness, I sang. For I knew I had been chosen, not because I was good, but because he is good. Yet darkness increased. The last days had come close. Men were lovers of themselves, narcissists wrapped in polished theology. They chased money, mocked wisdom, despised their parents, and called evil good. They wore holiness as a mask but denied its fire. Their words were smooth, their hearts hard. They preyed on the weak. They wormed into homes. They captivated with clever talk and godless charm. Always learning, never changing. They opposed the truth with smiles and sold their souls for applause. But their downfall would be obvious. Their fruit would betray them. And we, those who love truth, had to hold fast. From my youth, I had known the scriptures. They had been my bread and my breath. I had wept over the Psalms, trembled at the prophets, and found life in the red letters of the Christ. Now they burned brighter than ever. All scripture is God-breathed, Paul had written. A sword, a balm, a guide. It trained me, rebuked me, rescued me. In the furnace of affliction, it steadied my soul. And then came the trial, the fiery ordeal that had been long foretold. They came not with swords, but with silence, with exile, with laughter, with shame. I was rejected from marketplaces. I was labeled strange. I was spit upon by neighbors. And in the solitude of the cross, I understood something deeper. Suffering is not the absence of God. It is the mark of his Son. I remembered Peter's words as the night stretched long and bitter. Do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice, that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. And so I rejoiced, not loudly, not foolishly, but deeply, for if I suffered because of his name, then I bore his image. I was not abandoned. The Spirit of glory rested on me. I had once feared fire. Now I understood. It purified. I became familiar with scarcity, of food, of warmth, of friends, but never of God. His presence thickened in my loneliness. His voice became clearer in my lack. When I had nothing, I had him, and he was enough. Sometimes I would lie beneath the stars and speak aloud. You are my refuge, my sovereign Lord. You are my portion forever. The stars, ancient as they were, seemed to agree. Then came the vision. It was unlike dream or memory. It was reality unshackled. I stood in a great hall full of light, yet cast no shadow. Around me were souls robed in white, radiant, peaceful. Before me it was a scroll, unfurled across the air, written in fire. A voice, gentle, thunderous, spoke. Blessed are those who overcome, for they shall inherit what cannot be shaken. And suddenly I knew this life was a vapor, a training ground, a preparation. The trials were not proof of abandonment, but proof of sonship. When I awoke, the world had not changed, but I had. Where once I questioned, now I trusted. Where once I envied, now I prayed. Where once I feared, now I hoped. And where once I was merely surviving, now I was bearing fruit. I returned to villages, to cities, to fields. I walked among the broken, the arrogant, the hungry, and the blind. To some I spoke. To others I simply listened. To all I offered the seed. There was a boy named Eli who sat outside a burned-down chapel. He had lost his father, his faith, and most of his hope. He asked me, "How do you trust a God who stays silent?" I sat beside him for a long time. Then I whispered, "He is not silent. You just stopped listening." And I told him of a God who weeps, who waits, who walked among us not as a king on a throne, but as a carpenter who bled. That night, he listened, not to me but to the stirring in his heart. There was a woman named Miriam who had once preached the gospel with fire, but had been cast aside by her church when her husband fell into disgrace. She was bitter, angry, alone. I found her by a well, drawing water in silence. She said, "I'm not clean anymore." I said, "The woman at the well wasn't either, until she met living water." She wept, not from shame, from recognition. There was a man named Jonah who had memorized entire books of scripture, but never known grace. He corrected everyone, condemned everyone, feared everyone. He clung to truth like a weapon, not a light. I told him the parable of the wheat and weeds. "Let both grow," I said. "Do you trust the master to harvest rightly?" He said nothing, but his hand stopped trembling. And so I became a witness, not because I was worthy, but because I had seen. I had seen the fire and survived. I had tasted the bitterness of envy, the silence of suffering, and the sweetness of nearness. I had walked through the valley of unanswered questions and emerged with a deeper reverence, not clearer answers. Years passed. My beard grew white. The world spun faster. New idols rose, old ones returned under new names. Empires fell. Prophets were mocked. Churches divided. But the vine remained, and I remained in him. One final time, I found myself back at the vineyard, where I first heard his whisper. The vines were still strong. The branches bore fruit. I sat beneath the arbor, closed my eyes, and prayed. "Lord, take me into glory when the time is right. And until then, prune me that I may bear more fruit," the wind answered. And I knew the story was not over. The kingdom was still growing, mustard seed by mustard seed, soul by soul, field by field. The years folded over me like parchment, and still I walked. I passed through lands where idols had golden tongues, and preachers had hollow eyes, where truth was bought and grace was sold in bottles, where fame was clothed in scripture and God's name was used to build thrones of sand. And still the vine grew. It did not shout. It did not demand. It whispered in hunger, in humility, in prison cells and orphaned hearts. I saw it bloom in the mud. I saw it break through concrete. I saw it take root in the most unlikely place, like my own soul. One dusk, I came upon a quiet fire, where a small group of strangers sat in silence. Their faces bore the lines of loss and long endurance. Their eyes flickered with both pain and hope. A young girl, no older than 10, clutched a torn parchment in her hands. She read from it slowly, stumbling over the words, "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." No one clapped. No one corrected her. They simply nodded. That night, I did not preach. I simply sat and let the Spirit speak in stillness. Later, a traveler asked me, Why does your face look like peace when the world is burning? I smiled softly and replied, because I've walked through fire and found a hand still holding mine. The persecution grew harsher. Laws changed, voices silenced. Many recanted their faith, not from disbelief, but from weariness. They said, "Policies, we waited for him, but he did not come." They were like seed on rocky soil. They had no root. The sun had risen. The heat had revealed what the soil hid. I mourned for them, but I did not condemn. They were beloved, just unready. But others remained, and to them, the word burned brighter than ever. Not as a defense, but as a dwelling. We didn't wield scripture. We were hidden in it. At night, when I could not sleep, I would recite the parables back to the darkness. The kingdom is like treasure hidden in a field. The kingdom is like yeast in the dough. The kingdom is like a net cast into the sea. They were not just metaphors. They were prophecy. They were maps. And I followed them with my feet and my faith. Then came the silence. Not from God, but from people. A famine of hearing. A drought of listening. The crowds no longer gathered. The fire pits where believers met were extinguished by fear. Some days I walked for hours and saw no soul brave enough to speak aloud his name. But I remembered the words, "Remain in me." Those who remain will bear much fruit. And so I remained. One cold morning, I came upon an abandoned house. Stone walls, roof collapsed, ivy overtaking the doorway. Inside, a child was crying. Alone, hungry, eyes wide with terror. I knelt and offered him the crust of bread I had saved from 2 days before. He devoured it. Then I said, "You are not forgotten. You are chosen." He did not respond, but his tears slowed, and I knew this too was fruit. The gospel was no longer just something I preached. It was something I beside. A living epistle, written not with ink, but with scars and silence and steadfastness. I no longer needed to be heard. I only needed to be faithful. One day, a messenger brought me a note. It read, "They are asking for your story. The elders, the exiles, the broken. Will you write it down?" I hesitated. I had never considered myself a writer, only a witness, but I took up the pen, and I began. In the days when the world was loud with ambition and silent with reverence, I walked among the proud, and so I began again, for their sake, for your sake, for the sake of those still in the fire. I wrote through the winter. My fingers grew numb, but the fire in me did not fade. Each word was a wound and a healing. Each line was a confession and a declaration. And when I finally finished the last word, I did not feel pride. I felt peace. I whispered aloud to the empty room, "I have kept the faith." Soon after, my breath began to shorten. I could no longer walk far, but I was not afraid. He had told me long ago, "I go to prepare a place for you. I will come again and take you to myself." And I believed him. I still do. On the last morning of my life, I sat beneath the same tree where I had once heard his whisper about vines and branches. The sun had just risen. The birds had just begun their song. And I smiled, not because the pain was gone, not because the world had changed, but because I was going home. The air that morning was still. No shouting, no danger, no noise of men, only the rustle of wind and the quiet breath of the earth exhaling. I closed my eyes beneath the vine-covered arbor, where decades ago I had first understood. He is the vine, and I am the branch. And now the time of pruning had passed. The gardener was coming. I was ready. In my final hours, memories walked softly through the garden of my thoughts, faces, tears, fires, parables. But more than all of them, I remembered his voice. "You did not choose me. I chose you. And I appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last." I had gone, I had remained. And by grace I had borne fruit. Not fight, not fortune, but souls awakened, lives touched. Truth carried like flame in cupped hands through a howling world. Before my final breath, I prayed once more. Father, for those who will read these words, those scattered in the cities and fields, those weary, those persecuted, those burning with doubt, may they know you. May they see beyond the weeds. May they become soil that receives, branches that remain, witnesses who endure. And I let go, not into darkness, but into light. Epilogue from an unknown scribe years later. His writings spread carefully at first. Scraps of parchment passed hand to hand, read aloud in caves and by candlelight. No signature, no self-glory. Only the steady rhythm of someone who had walked with fire and not been condemned. They called him the witness. To some he was a prophet, to others a madman. But to those who knew the voice of the true vine, he was a brother. His story outlived him, not because it was grand, but because it was true. And the vine, it still grows. Final lines, written on the back of the last page in his own hand. If you are reading this, you are the next witness. You are the soil he chooses to plant. Let the word root deep. Do not fear the fire. It is not to destroy you. It is to make you shine. Stay near. Remain. Bear fruit. The gardener is not far.